Before we begin this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Epic Story Spot, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And trust me, you're going to want to watch this one all the way to the very end. Ethan Parker never expected his life to change on an ordinary Tuesday evening. At 25, he was a young mechanic with grease permanently under his fingernails and exhaustion permanently in his eyes. Since their parents had passed away 3 years ago, Ethan had been raising his younger sister Lila, who was just 19 and starting community college. Money was tight. Every paycheck from the auto shop seemed to vanish as soon as it landed, going toward rent, groceries, and tuition bills. Ethan sometimes wondered if he'd ever get out of the cycle, or if his life would always be a blur of long shifts, empty bank accounts, and worry. But no matter how tired he felt, Ethan never stopped noticing the people around him. He knew which customers were struggling with their cars, which neighbors lived alone, and which elderly residents needed a little extra help. That awareness was what made him glance across the street that evening, just as the rain started to fall. Margaret Holloway, his elderly neighbor, was struggling at the bottom of her driveway. She was bent nearly double under the weight of 2 bulging grocery bags. The handles cut into her thin wrists as she tried to haul them up the cracked path toward her weathered old house. Without thinking, Ethan jogged across the street, rain spattering his jacket. "Here, let me help you with those, Mrs. Holloway." She looked up in surprise, her pale eyes wide beneath her umbrella. "Oh, Ethan, I couldn't possibly ask you." "You didn't ask," Ethan said with a grin. He took the bags gently from her arms. They were heavier than they looked, filled with cans, jars, and a carton of milk. "You'll hurt yourself carrying these." She gave a small laugh, soft but tired. "Well, maybe you're right. I forget sometimes that I'm not as young as I used to be." He walked beside her up the path, noting the overgrown hedges, the peeling paint on the shutters, the way the house seemed to sag with age. It was one of the oldest homes in town, a place he'd walked past 1,000 times without really thinking about who lived inside. Margaret fumbled for her keys, but her hands trembled so badly she dropped them. Ethan bent, picked them up, and slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dim, musty interior. "Thank you," Margaret said, stepping inside. "I don't get many visitors these days. My knees aren't what they once were, and the world outside moves too fast." Ethan carried the groceries to the kitchen, setting them down on the scarred oak counter. The room was cluttered with old jars, dusty curtains, and faded photographs on the walls. He glanced at one picture, a black and white portrait of a young couple, smiling stiffly at the camera. "Family?" he asked. Margaret's gaze softened. "Yes, long gone now, but I keep them close." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. He stacked the cans in her cupboard, trying not to intrude. But as he reached for a high shelf, he noticed something odd. The paneling above the cabinet had a tiny crack, and through it, he could see faint slivers of light. He frowned. "Mrs. Holloway, is there a room up there?" Her face froze. For a moment, she looked younger, sharper, her eyes narrowing. "What did you see?" "Just light," Ethan said carefully, "like there's space behind a wall." Margaret set down the loaf of bread she was holding. She seemed to hesitate. Then she reached for a chair and climbed up with surprising speed for her age. She pressed her hand against the panel, and with a sudden push, it shifted. A hidden latch clicked, and a narrow door swung open. Ethan's breath caught. Behind the panel was a staircase leading upward into darkness. Margaret stepped down, her voice trembling. "I wasn't sure anyone would ever notice. But maybe it's time." Ethan stared at her. "Time for what?" Margaret looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed to hold years of secrets. "Time for you to know the truth. Come with me." She picked up a small lantern from the counter, lit it with a shaky hand, and held it out to him. The flame flickered across her lined face, casting deep shadows. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He glanced back at the rain-slicked street. then at the dark staircase yawning before him. Margaret stepped into the opening. "Are you coming, Ethan?" He hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I'm coming." And with that, he followed her up into the hidden darkness, unaware that his entire life was about to be rewritten. Ethan followed Margaret up the narrow staircase, the lantern's glow bouncing across peeling wallpaper and exposed beams. The air smelled of cedar and dust, as if the space had been sealed away for decades. Each step groaned beneath their weight, and the sound echoed strangely, as though the house itself was listening. At the top of the stairs was a small landing. Margaret set the lantern on a wooden chest and pressed her palm against a panel in the wall. With a quiet scrape, the panel swung inward to reveal a hidden room. Ethan's breath caught. The room was small, but filled from floor to ceiling with shelves. Stacks of books leaned against one another. Papers yellowed with age lay in neat bundles tied with twine, and in the center sat a wooden trunk with an iron clasp. The lantern light flickered across it, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. Ethan stepped inside, awed. "What is this place?" Margaret's voice was quiet but firm. "It's a part of my family's history, one I've guarded for most of my life. My late husband and his father before him. They believed some truths should never see daylight." Ethan turned toward her, confused. "And you? Do you believe that too?" Margaret looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I did, for a long time. But now I'm not so sure." She reached for the trunk with trembling hands. The iron clasp was rusted, but when she inserted a small key from her apron pocket, it clicked open. Inside lay letters, journals, and old photographs. Margaret picked one up, the paper fragile in her hands, and passed it to Ethan. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was the same as the letter he had first found. This one was addressed to someone named Clara, dated 1943. It spoke of secret meetings, hidden rooms, and an unspoken pact between townsfolk to protect something valuable. "What does it mean?" Ethan asked. Margaret's voice wavered. "It means my family was not what they seemed. They built this town's wealth, yes, but they also built walls to keep secrets. Some were noble, some were not." Ethan frowned. "Why show me this?" Margaret looked at him intently. "Because you helped me when you didn't have to. You didn't look at me as a burden. You saw me. That tells me you'll protect the truth, not bury it." Ethan swallowed hard. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, just a mechanic trying to survive. But in that moment, under the lantern's glow, he felt the weight of something bigger settling on his shoulders. He spent hours with Margaret in the hidden room, reading letters aloud while she explained what little she knew. She told him about her husband, who had sworn to keep the family's secrets sealed away. She told him about the day she found the hidden room herself, decades ago, and how she had promised to guard it until she found someone worthy of knowing. By the time Ethan left, dawn was breaking. He walked home through empty streets, his mind spinning. At breakfast, Lila noticed the faraway look in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, then placed the old letter on the table. "I found this in Mrs. Holloway's house. And there's more. A whole hidden room full of letters and journals. They're connected to her family. And maybe to us." Lila's eyes widened as she picked up the letter. "Ethan, this is incredible. You've always loved stories, but this isn't just a story. This is history. Why would anyone hide something like this?" "Because it changes everything," Ethan said quietly. "And not everyone wants that." That evening, after work at the auto shop, Ethan returned to Margaret's house. Daniel had insisted on coming too. "If this is real, it could be the kind of discovery historians dream of," he said as they climbed the steps. Margaret welcomed them inside, her frail frame dwarfed by the heavy door. She led them back upstairs, through the hidden panel, and into the secret room once more. They spent hours reading. One journal described how members of Margaret's family secretly sheltered travelers during the Second World War, people fleeing persecution. Another letter hinted at treasures hidden in the house itself. Not gold, but documents, artifacts, and records that could prove the town's founding family had not only wealth, but also dark ties to smuggling and betrayal. As Ethan turned a page, a folded paper slipped out. He opened it carefully, and his heart stopped. It was another letter, this time addressed to my beloved Margaret. He frowned. "Wait, this isn't your writing, is it?" Margaret's face went pale. She reached for the letter, but Ethan pulled it just out of reach. "Why does it say your name, Mrs. Holloway?" Her lips trembled. She sat heavily in an old wooden chair, the lantern's glow catching her silver hair. "Because it was written to me, many years ago, from a man who swore me to secrecy." Daniel leaned forward. "Who was he?" Margaret closed her eyes. "He was a Whitfield, one of the last, and he trusted me with his secret, a secret so dangerous it could ruin everything his family built. I thought I could keep it buried forever, but I was wrong. People still come looking for it. People who don't want the truth out." Ethan's skin prickled. "That man in the coat. He was after the letters." Margaret nodded. "And he won't stop." They were still speaking when a loud knock echoed through the empty house. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Margaret stiffened. Daniel's eyes widened. "It's him." Ethan's heart raced. He looked at the bundle of letters in Margaret's lap, then at the hidden door behind them. They had stumbled onto something far larger than they realized. And now, someone else wanted it silenced. The knocking came again, harder this time. A voice called out, low and cold, "Mrs. Holloway, it's time to hand them over." Ethan's pulse thundered. Margaret looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "We can't let him in," she whispered. "But we can't stay here either." The lantern flames sputtered, casting the room in shadow. Ethan held the letter tighter, knowing the choice before him. Stay and risk everything, or run and fight to bring the truth into the light. Ethan's chest tightened as the heavy knocks shook the front door again. Margaret gripped his arm, her frail hand surprisingly strong. Daniel whispered, "We need to get these letters out of here before he forces his way inside." Ethan looked down at the bundle of papers. His fingers trembled, but his resolve hardened. "We'll take them. Lila can hide them until we figure this out." Margaret shook her head. "It's not just about hiding them, Ethan. It's about telling the story. If you don't, they'll always come back, always try to bury it again." The knocking turned into pounding. A voice barked, "Last chance, Mrs. Holloway." Ethan knew he couldn't let the man destroy everything. "Is there another way out?" he asked. Margaret nodded quickly. "Through the cellar. There's an old coal chute that leads outside." Together, they scrambled down the narrow stairwell, clutching the lantern and the letters. The pounding above them grew louder. Ethan shoved open the heavy cellar door, and the 3 of them slipped out into the pouring rain, their shoes splashing in puddles as they hurried down the alley behind the mansion. Ethan's mind raced. He could hear footsteps behind them, the shadow of the man moving closer. He grabbed Margaret's arm, urging her forward. Daniel carried the bulk of the papers, his face grim with determination. They reached Ethan's apartment just before dawn, soaked and shivering. Lila gasped when she saw them. "What happened?" "No time," Ethan said, locking the door behind them. "We need to keep these safe." They spread the letters across the kitchen table. Some are nearly falling apart, their ink smudged with age. Ethan and Lila worked carefully, sliding them into protective sleeves Margaret had brought from the library. For days, the small apartment became a secret archive. Ethan went to work each morning, but every night he and Lila pored over the letters with Margaret and Daniel. They pieced together a story that seemed impossible. The Whitfield family, the wealthy founders of Willowbrook, had built their fortune on trade and shipping. But behind the scenes, one branch of the family had risked everything to run a secret network, smuggling refugees out of war-torn Europe during the 1940s. They had hidden people in safe houses, smuggled documents, and even forged passports. But there was another side. The other branch of the family had betrayed them, leaking information to authorities in exchange for political power. Lives were lost. Families were torn apart. The journals told of heartbreak, betrayal, and courage in equal measure. And then came the biggest shock of all. One letter, written in Eleanor Whitfield's hand, spoke of a child born in secret, hidden away from the family's judgment, a daughter she had entrusted to a trusted friend. Emily Carter's story with the hidden letter had been haunting Ethan's thoughts, and now he felt the same threads pulling at him. He turned to Margaret. "Was this you? Were you the one who took in the child?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. "Yes, that child was me." The room fell silent. The rain tapped against the window, steady and soft. Margaret looked down at her trembling hands. "My mother was Eleanor Whitfield. She loved a man her family did not approve of. When I was born, she knew she couldn't raise me under their roof. She placed me with a family she trusted, and she left me these letters so I would know the truth someday." Ethan's heart ached for her. "You've carried this secret your whole life." Margaret gave a shaky smile. "Yes, and now I'm old, and I don't have much time left. But I see in you, Ethan, the same heart my mother must have seen in her friend. You helped me when you didn't have to. You chose kindness. That's why I believe you were meant to find this." Ethan didn't know what to say. He thought about Lila, about the burden he had carried since their parents' death. Maybe this wasn't just Margaret's story. Maybe it was his chance to find something greater than himself. One evening, Daniel came rushing into the apartment with a newspaper clutched in his hand. "It's out," he said breathlessly. "The story's published." The headline blared. "Hidden Letters Reveal Whitfield Family's Secret Past." Ethan read the article, his heart pounding. The journalist had done justice to the story, weaving together the letters, the journals, and Margaret's testimony. The town buzzed with shock and disbelief. Some were angry, calling it slander. Others were moved to tears, grateful that the truth had finally come to light. But the real change came a week later. Margaret sat with Ethan and Lila in their small apartment. She was weaker now, her hands trembling as she reached in her bag. She pulled out a smaller envelope, sealed with the same rose emblem. "This," she said softly, "is my will. I've spoken with Mr. Jacobs, my lawyer. I don't have much family left, but I do have you, Ethan. And Lila, you've been more of a family to me than anyone else in years." Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. "Mrs. Holloway, you don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted. "The house, the land, and what's left of the Whitfield fortune. I wanted to go to you both. You'll know what to do with it. You'll protect the story, not bury it." Lila gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan's throat tightened. He tried to protest again, but Margaret squeezed his hand. "Kindness deserves to be rewarded, Ethan. And I believe you'll turn this into something good." The months that followed were a whirlwind. The documentary team arrived, setting up cameras inside Margaret's house, now being carefully restored by local historians. Ethan and Lila found themselves sitting for interviews, holding letters up to the light as they told the story of the Whitfields. Margaret's face lit up whenever she spoke about her mother's courage, even as her strength faded. When the documentary aired on national television, everything changed. Donations poured in to restore the mansion and preserve the letters. Tourists began to visit Willowbrook, eager to see the hidden chamber for themselves. The town's struggling economy bloomed with new shops, cafes, and guided tours. Ethan found himself at the center of it all. Reporters called him the young mechanic who unearthed history. His auto shop filled with customers, and for the first time, he could pay every bill without fear. But what mattered most wasn't the attention or even the money. It was the way Margaret smiled when she saw her mother's name spoken with honor on television. It was the way Lila beamed when she realized they no longer had to worry about tuition. It was the way the town came together, not to bury the past, but to embrace it. One evening, after the cameras had left and the tourists had gone home, Ethan stood in the restored library of the mansion. The hidden room had been carefully preserved, the shelves of letters displayed behind glass. He walked slowly among them, the lantern replaced now with warm electric lights. He paused before the carved rose symbol on the wooden panel, his hand brushing the familiar grooves. Margaret had passed away peacefully a few weeks earlier, leaving the house and its legacy in his care. It was a heavy responsibility, but Ethan no longer felt crushed beneath it. He felt ready. Lila joined him, her eyes bright. "She'd be proud of you," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "She'd be proud of us. This isn't just my story. It's hers. It's ours. And now it belongs to everyone." They stood together, the quiet of the house surrounding them. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. His life was no longer just about survival. It was about carrying forward a story that mattered, one that would inspire generations to come. As he locked the doors of the mansion that night, he glanced back at the glowing windows. He thought of the moment he had first crossed the street to help an elderly neighbor with her groceries. A simple act of kindness that had led to everything. He smiled at himself, whispering into the night, "One small choice, and everything changes." And it was true, because Ethan Parker had helped an elderly neighbor, and in doing so, he had uncovered a secret fortune, not just of money and property, but of history, family, and a legacy that would live on forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Epic Story Spot, and come back tomorrow for another inspiring